Hey boys and girls, yesterday we started the Wednesday Wars and we learned a little bit about our character Hauling Hood. We know that he believes there's this conspiracy against him from his teacher, Mrs. Baker, and he's trying to get allies. He talked to his mom, who didn't believe him. He talked to his dad, who didn't believe him. So today I guess we'll figure out whether or not this conspiracy is true and if he can find himself an ally. I think that you can very quickly see that Hauling Hood has at least a giant imagination. All right, so today, again, we're going to be looking at our characters and our setting. We have met we've seen our first classroom, we've seen his house, and we've sort of met all of the main players so far, but we're going to start to dive into them a little bit more. So we're still at the perfect house. He's just talked to mom, he's just talked to dad. Let's find out what happens. There was only my sister left. To ask your big sister to be your ally is like asking Nova Scotia to go into battle with you. All right, quick question. Where is Nova Scotia? So Nova Scotia is a really cool place. Map right here. It's located in Canada, and I think that Canada is known for their willingness to be peaceful. So they're not a country that's going to jump into war. They're going to be a country who tries to stay out of it. But I knocked on her door. Oh, by the way, it's his sister. Like, how's this going to go? But I knocked on her door anyway, loudly, since the Monkees were playing. Monkees are a great band from the 60s. I don't know, great might be overstating it a little bit, but they were a band literally created for a TV show, but ended up being very popular during the time of the Beatles. They were kind of like America's version of the Beatles. They weren't obviously as successful as the Beatles, but they obviously they caught wind in the 60s, and then they caught wind again in the 80s. MTV started playing them on TV quite a bit. So
hey, we're the Monkees, and people say we monkey around.
I knocked on her door anyways, loudly, since the Monkees were playing. She pulled it open and stood there, her hands on her hips. Her lipstick was the color of a new fire engine. Similar metaphor. Mrs. Baker hates my guts, I told her. So do I, she said. I could use some help with this. Ask Mom. She says that Mrs. Baker doesn't hate my guts. Ask Dad. Silence, if you call it silence when the Monkees are playing. Oh, she said, it might hurt a business deal, right? So he won't help the son who is going to inherit Hood and Associates. What am I supposed to do? If I were you, I'd head to California, she said, foreshadowing. Try again. She leaned against her door. Mrs. Baker hates your guts, right? I nodded. Then Hauling, you might try getting some. And she closed her door. Get some guts, Hauling. Don't know what that means yet, but I think we'll probably figure it out. That night, I read Treasure Island again. And I don't want to brag, but I've read Treasure Island 4 times and Kidnapped twice, and The Black Arrow twice. I even read Ivanhoe halfway through before I gave up, since I started The Call of the Wild, and it was a whole lot better. So Treasure Island is a fantastic book, and we're not going to read it this year, but it is worth your while. I will warn you, it does go back a little bit, and there are some weird parts in the book, but it is a fabulous book, and they're going to be weaving that story throughout this story. So if you ever get an opportunity to read Treasure Island, you should. If you've ever seen the movie Treasure Planet, which is the cartoon that Disney put out, obviously it's different because it's in space, but it's based off of that. But Treasure Island in and of itself is really good. There's actually a good version of it with Christian Bale, who played Batman when he was a little boy, not a little boy, but around your age, maybe a little bit older, where he actually plays the main character. I skipped to the part where Jim Hawkins is stealing the Hispaniola, and he's up on the mast, and Israel Hands is climbing toward him, clutching a dagger. Even so, Jim's in pretty good shape, since he's got 2 pistols against a single dagger, and Israel Hands seems about to give in. I'll have to strike which comes hard, he says. I suppose he hates Jim's guts right at that moment, and Jim smiles, since he knows he's got him. That's guts. But then Israel Hands throws the dagger, and it's just dumb luck that saves Jim. And I didn't want to count on just dumb luck. Mrs. Baker eyed me all day on Tuesday, looking like she wanted something awful to happen, sort of like what Israel Hands wanted to happen to Jim Hawkins. Simile. It started first thing in the morning when I caught her watching me come out of the coat room and walk toward my desk. By the way, if you're wondering why a 7th grade classroom had a coat room, it isn't because we weren't old enough to have lockers. It's because Camillo Junior High used to be Camillo Elementary until the town built a new Camillo Elementary and attached it to the old Camillo Elementary by the kitchen hallway, and then made the old Camillo Elementary into the new Camillo Junior High. So all the rooms on the 3rd floor where the 7th grade had coat rooms. That's where we put our stuff, even though it was 1967 already. And we should have had hall lockers like every other 7th grade in the civilized world. So I caught Mrs. Baker watching me come out of the coat room and walk toward my desk. She leaned forward as if she was looking for something in her desk. It was creepy. But just before I sat down, I figured it out. She'd booby-trapped my desk like Captain Flint would have. It all came to me in a sort of vision, the kind of thing that Pastor McClellan sometimes talked about, how God sends a message to you just before some disaster, and if you listen, you'll stay alive. But if you don't, you don't. Man, does he have a creative mind, doesn't he? I looked at my desk. I didn't see any tripwires, so probably there weren't any explosive. I checked the screws. They were all still in, so it wouldn't fall flat when I sat down. Maybe there was something inside, something terrible inside, something really awful inside, something left over from the 8th grade biology labs last spring. I looked at Mrs. Baker again. She had looked away, a half smile on her lips. Really, talk about guilt. So I asked Meryl Lee Kowalski, who has been in love with me since she first laid eyes on me in the 3rd grade. I'm just saying what she told me. I asked her to open my desk first. So this girl supposedly has, now again, this is coming from Halling, and we have to take that into account. And he said, oh, she's loved me since the 3rd grade. So she comes over. He's worried that this desk is literally going to blow up. So what does he do? He has her open the desk. How come, she says. Sometimes even true love can be suspicious. Just because. Just because isn't much of a reason. Just because there might be a surprise. For who? For you. For me? For you. She lifted the desktop. She looked under English for you and me, mathematics for you and me, and geography for you and me. I don't see anything, she said. I looked inside. Maybe I was wrong? Maybe I was wrong, said Meryl Lee, and dropped the desktop loudly. Oh, she said, sorry, I was supposed to wait until you put your fingers there. Love and hate in 7th grade are not far apart, let me tell you. So when I went to, I don't think it was McCain, I think it was James W. Parker, we used to have desks and you'd lift the top and you'd set your books in. I actually do think it was when I went to McCain. You know how now you slide them in? We used to have a lift top and you'd lift them up and you'd let the thing slide. You'd crush your fingers and you could see like she was saying that she wanted to crush his fingers because he was being a jerk. And he was. Character trait, right? At lunchtime, I was afraid to go out for recess since I figured that Mrs. Baker had probably recruited an 8th grader to do something awful to me. There was Doug Switek's brother, for one, who was already shaving and had been to 3 police stations in 2 states and who once spent a night in jail. No one knew what for, but I thought it might be for something in the number 390s, or maybe even number 410 itself. Doug Switek said that if his father hadn't bribed the judge, his brother would have been on death row. We all believed him. Is that story true? So they're talking about an 8th grader. It's Doug Switek's brother. We know Doug Switek's a troublemaker, but they're saying that Doug Switek, who's shaving, who's been in jail in 3 police stations in 2 states, and his brother would be on death row right now if not for his father. Doesn't sound true to me. We all believed him. "Why don't you go out for lunch recess?" said Mrs. Baker to me. "Everyone else is gone." I held up English for you and me. "I thought I'd read in here," I said. "Go out for recess," she said, criminal intent gleaming in her eye. "I'm comfortable here." "Mr. Hood," she said. She stood up and crossed her arms. I realized I was alone in the room with no witnesses and no mast to climb to get away. He's comparing it to Treasure Island. I went out for recess. I kept a perimeter of about 10 feet or so around me and stayed in Mrs. Sidman's line of sight. I almost asked her for her rain hat. You never know what might come in handy when something awful is about to happen to you. Then, as if the dread day of doom and disaster had come to Camillo Junior High, I heard, "Hey, Hood." It was Doug Switek's brother. He entered my perimeter. I took 3 steps closer to Mrs. Sidman. She moved away and held her rain hat firmly. Hood, you play soccer? We need another guy." Doug Switek's brother was moving toward me. The hair on his chest leaped over the neck of his t-shirt. Personification. "Go ahead," called the helpful Mrs. Sidman from a distance. "If you don't play, someone will have to sit out." If I don't play, I'll live another day, I thought. Hood, said Doug Switek's brother. "You coming or not?" What could I do? It was like walking into my own destiny. Great vocabulary word. Destiny. We'll talk about that word later in the book. You could look it up now, though. "You're on that side," he pointed. I already knew that. "You're a back," he said. I knew that too. Destiny has a way of letting you know these things. "I am a forward." I could have said it for him. "That means you have to try to stop me." I nodded. "Think you can?" I suppose I could stop you, I thought. I suppose I could stop you with a Bradley tank, armor 2 inches thick, 3 mounted machine guns, and a grenade launcher. Then I suppose I could stop you. "I can try," I said. "You can try." Doug Switek's brother laughed, and I bet that if I had looked over my shoulder, I would have seen Mrs. Baker peering out her 3rd-floor classroom window, and she would have been laughing too. So Halling thinks Mrs. Baker put Doug Switek's brother up to. But the thing about soccer is that you can run around a whole lot and never, ever touch the ball. And if you do have to touch the ball, you can kick it away before anyone comes near you. That's what I figured on doing. Doug Switek's brother wouldn't even come near me, and I would foil Mrs. Baker's nefarious plan. So there's 2 good words there. Foil, could stop. Mrs. Baker's nefarious plan, evil. But Doug Switek's brother had clearly received instructions. The first time he got the ball, he looked around and then came right at me. He wasn't like a normal forward, who everyone knows is supposed to avoid the defense. He just came right at me. And there was a growl that rose out of him like he was some great clod of living earth that hadn't evolved out of the Mesozoic era, howling and roaring and slobbering and coming to crush me. Similes, there was a growl that rose out of him like he was some great clod of living earth that hadn't evolved out of the Mesozoic era. So comparing him to a caveman, howling and roaring and slobbering and coming to crush me. What an outstanding simile. I expect that the watching Mrs. Baker was almost giddy at the thought. "Get in front of him!" screamed Danny Hupfer, who was our goalie. "In front of him!" His voice was cracking, probably because he was imagining the propulsion, vocabulary word moving forward, of a soccer ball as it left Doug Switek's brother's foot and hurtled toward the goal, and wondering what it might do to his chest. I didn't move. Danny screamed again. I think he screamed, "In front!" But I'm not sure. I don't think he was using language at all. Imagine a sound with a whole lot of high vowels, and I think you'd have it. But it didn't make any difference what he screamed, because of course I wasn't going to get in front. There was no way in the world I was going to get in front. If Doug Switek's brother scored, he scored. It was just a game after all. I stepped toward the sideline away from the goal. And Doug Switek's brother veered toward me. I ran back a bit and stepped even closer to the sideline. And he veered toward me again. So as Danny Hupfer screamed vowels, Doug Switek's brother growled Mesozoically, I felt my life come down to this one hard point. Like it had been a funnel channeling everything I had ever done to this one moment when it would all end. So he's convinced Doug Switek's brother is going to take him out. And that was when I remembered Jim Hawkins climbing up the side of the Hispaniola to steal her, tearing down the Jolly Roger flag, sitting in the cross trees and holding Israel hands back. Guts. Remember, his sister told him to get some guts. So is he. So I glanced up at Mrs. Baker's window. She wasn't there, probably so she wouldn't be accused of being an accomplice. Vocabulary word. Talk to me. What is accomplice? And then I ran toward the goal, turned and stood. I waited for Doug Switek's brother to come. It was probably kind of noble to see. I stood my ground, and I stood my ground, and I stood my ground until the howling and the roaring and the slobbering were about on top of me. And then I closed my eyes. Nothing says you have to look at your destiny, and stepped out of the way. Almost. I left my right foot behind, and Doug Switek's hairy brother tripped over it. Everything suddenly increased in volume. The howling and the roaring and the slobbering, the whistling of Doug Switek's brother's airborne body hurtling toward the goal, the screams of Danny Hupfer, my own hollering as I clutched my crushed foot. Then there came an iron thunk against the goalpost, which bent at a sudden angle around Doug Switek's brother's head, and everything was quiet. I opened my eyes again. Doug Switek's brother was standing and sort of wobbling. Mrs. Sidman was running over, though properly speaking, what she did wasn't really running. It was more of a panicky shuffle. She probably saw negligent playground monitor headlines in her future. When she got to him, Doug Switek's brother was still wobbling, and he looked at her with his eyes kind of crossed. Are you all right? Mrs. Sidman asked, and held onto his arm. He nodded once, then threw up on her. Poor Mrs. Sidman. First it was Doug Switek who got her, now Doug Switek's brother. He had eaten a liverwurst and egg sandwich for lunch. Liverwurst. No one ever wants to see a liverwurst and egg sandwich twice. And Mrs. Sidman's rain hat did not help at all. That was the end of the soccer game, except when that Danny Hupfer, a very relieved Danny Hupfer, ran up to thump me on the back. You sure did take him out. I didn't mean to take him out. Sure, did you see him fly? Like a missile. Simile. I didn't mean to take him out, I hollered. I never saw anyone get taken out like that before. Doug Switek ran over. You took out my brother? I didn't mean to take out your brother. Everyone says you took out my brother. I've been wanting to do that since I was out of the womb. Hyperbole. It was like a missile. Simile, said Danny. I limped back into school, trying not to look at an unhappy Mrs. Sidman, who was holding and wobbling Doug Switek's brother at the same time that she was using her rain hat to do not very much. Liverwurst is like that. Mara Lee was waiting for me at the door. You took out Doug Switek's brother? She asked. I didn't mean to take him out. Then how did he end up flying through the air? I tripped him. You tripped him? Yes, I tripped him. On purpose? Sort of. Isn't that cheating? He's 3 times bigger than I am. So that means you can cheat and make him look like an idiot? Oh, and you didn't try to make me look like an idiot opening your desk for some dumb surprise that wasn't even there. What's that got to do with it? Everything, said Marilee, and stomped away. There are times when she makes me feel as stupid as asphalt. Everything. What's that supposed to mean? Mrs. Baker's face was pinched when we came back into class. The disappointment of a failed assassination plot Her face stayed pinched most of the afternoon and got even pinchier when the PA announcement that Doug Switek's brother was fine, that he would be back in school after 10 days of observation, and that there was a need for a playground monitor for the rest of the week. We're going to stop right there. Does Mrs. Baker hate hauling? That is the question. Don't know that we know the answer. Great job today. Peace.